Hey YouTube, welcome back to another History Teacher Reacts video with Mr. Terry as I continue my search for historical knowledge found here on the internet. Alright, today we are continuing extra credits series on Admiral Yi. This is part 3, so if you have not seen part 1 and 2, you might want to check those out first. Been loving the series so far, thanks to the patron pledgers that voted on this video. They're the ones who brought this and featured it up on the channel. If you'd like to be a part of that, a link down below to our Patreon is down there, and all members get to vote and a poll I put up once a week for videos, again, that get featured here. If you like this video, make sure you head down below and give them a like and subscribe. The extra credits people, they are awesome. They are definitely deserving of your likes and your subscriptions. All right, let's get started.
The king had fled from Seoul. The court was making the arduous trek to Pyongyang. Half of Korea was already in Japanese hands. Yi Il, the very same man who had once tried to pass his negligence off to Yi Sun-shin, was the commander of the Korean army. His forces were routed in battle after battle. Essential fortifications and choke points were abandoned, surrendered with barely a fight. Then, in the Battle of Cheongju, the regular Korean forces, under the command of a man named Shin Rip, were annihilated. This is the moment that forces the king to abandon his capital. This is the moment that leads many to fear that Korea as a nation may not survive.
It's hard to imagine when, if you lose your capital city, and Seoul is kind of inland too, that if you lose that you have any prospect of moving forward. So I'm interested to see how they're going to get out of this.
But on the very same day that the king fled from his seat, Admiral Yi was destroying the Japanese fleet in Okpo Harbor. Hope for the nation lived in a handful of ships plying the coast.
It's just that, what does that do though if you're in the mainland already getting overrun? Like, how is this gonna help in the end? Cut off an escape by the Japanese, or like keep them from bringing in more troops and reinforcements? We'll see. What effect can the naval aspect happen when the land operation is already going poorly?
For 3 weeks after Okpo, Yi gathered charts, scouted out the enemy fleet, and waited for his secret weapon, the turtle ship, to
love
arrive.
those things.
Then his spies reported to him that the Japanese were anchored at Sachun. This was too near his personal headquarters for comfort, so it was time he tested out the turtle ship. It was time he drove them off. But when his tiny fleet of 26 ships arrived outside Sachun, he saw that the Japanese arquebusiers had taken up positions along the cliffs above the harbor. If he were to attack, they could pour down fire on his ships. He pondered this for a moment. Then he sent a small detachment to sail within sight of the Japanese fleet. Once they were sure the Japanese had spotted them, they turned and fled, and the Japanese gave chase. But the retreat was feigned. As soon as the Japanese fleet entered open water, Yi fell upon them with his entire force. His turtle ship plowed into the middle of the Japanese armada. Cannon fire rang out from all sides. Ships splintered and burned in the setting sun. The Japanese tried to close in, but they couldn't manage to board the covered turtle ship.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the points. The turtle ships are covered, I think, with an ironclad spiky kind of thing to keep them from being boarded, but at the same time have cannons and stuff, so they're heavily armored. Yeah, it'd be hard to siege something like that, right? Which has been traditionally a big part of naval warfare. If you can't destroy the ship necessarily, then get close to it and try to board it and take it from the inside. But that obviously difficult with how they've designed those ships. Pretty genius there.
And warships surrounding them and the turtle ship in their midst, the Japanese fought a hopeless battle until all 13 of the ships that had pursued the Koreans to open water were at the bottom of the sea. Not a single Korean vessel was lost. After the battle, as his commanders gathered for a debriefing, Yi loosed his coat, pulled out a sword, and dug out a bullet that had lodged in his shoulder. His sub-commanders were amazed. To maintain morale, Yi had let no one know that he'd been injured in the fight. But as they all sat dumbfounded, Yi simply began to brief them on what to do in case of a counterattack. The next day, local fishermen reported to Yi that the Japanese were anchored at Dangpo, and that their men were sacking the city. Yi ordered his fleet to move with all haste. He would not let another Japanese slaughter go unanswered. When they reached the harbor city of Dangpo, he once again smashed through the enemy line with his turtle ship, positioned it right next to the enemy flagship, and buried shot after shot in its side. With his turtle ship in their midst, the enemy couldn't maneuver, and because the turtle ship had heavy guns on all sides, it couldn't be flanked. It simply loosed salvo after salvo at everything around it. And while the turtle ship caused chaos, the rest of the Korean ships surrounded the Japanese and trapped them in the harbor.
So they're saying that too that the turtle ships could also be used to ram. God, it's like triple threat, man. You can shoot up close, up far, and protect yourself. Yeah, that's pretty devastating. Holy cow. How cool is that, though? In the other videos I talked about, I'd learned about turtle ships recently from Age of Empires. I've been playing a lot of that lately, and was playing as the Koreans, and they had the turtle ships, or their unique unit, if you know the game. And they're really cool. They're really fun to play with.
At the height of the battle, one of Yi Sun-shin's sub-commanders, Kwon-jun, stood upon the deck of his vessel, drew his bow, and loosed an arrow at the enemy admiral. The shot found its mark. 2 of his men then leapt upon the enemy flagship and cut off the Japanese admiral's head. Seeing their commander's head held aloft, the Japanese were thrown into a panic. Command broke down, and in the chaos, Yi's ships sank the Japanese vessels one by one. As night fell and the Koreans withdrew, not a single Japanese ship remained. 2 days later, another Korean fleet, a fleet that was supposed to have joined them before any of this began but ran behind, finally rendezvoused with Yi, bringing his squadron up to 51 ships in total. With this larger force, he began to chase down rumors of another anchored Japanese fleet sacking a Korean town. The rumor turned out to be true, and again, Yi pounced upon the Japanese while they were disorganized, plundering a town. Again, Yi sent his turtle ship into their midst, and again, he used a feigned retreat to lure them out into open water, although this time he did it to keep the Japanese from fleeing to shore if they were defeated. Again they followed, and again, upon his signal, his fleet turned upon their pursuers. Again, the Japanese admiral fell in the battle, and Japanese morale broke. Again, the Koreans trapped the fleeing vessels, and again, the Japanese fleet, 26 ships in all, was destroyed, without a single loss for Yi's forces.
This is incredible, the OP. Yeah, turtle ships are OP. You can't board them, you can't sink them. They would be, I guess, pretty slow, though, if you could outrun them. But they're usually, aren't they usually accompanied, I think, by quicker ships, you know what I mean? But
Turtle ship was OP. Upon hearing of all this, Hideyoshi was furious. He was so close to conquering Korea. His men had taken Pyongyang. The Korean court had been driven all the way to a tiny border village. Any further and the King of Korea wouldn't even be on Korean soil anymore. There was only one province he had not yet been able to overrun, Chola, where Yi was based. And without control of the sea, he couldn't resupply his massive army in the field. Yi must be destroyed. The order was given. There would be no more land raids from his navy until Yi's fleet was at the bottom of the Tsushima Strait. He ordered his admirals to pool their forces and to form a massive fleet to sweep aside this admiral that was causing him so much pain. The 3 main Japanese admirals were to gather their fleets in Busan, but the admiral with the largest fleet, Wakisaka Yasuharu, decided that bringing the fleets together was taking too long. Side note, if you watched our Sengoku Jidai series, this is one of the men who would eventually betray Ishida at the Battle of Sekigahara. Anyway, eager for glory and unwilling to wait for the rest of the Japanese forces, he set out with his 73 ships. I mean, why wait? He had 73 of the best ships in the Japanese fleet, and he knew Yi's armada, however devastating they might have been so far, was a small force. But Yi hadn't been idle after his last battle. He'd been drilling his men in new tactics and constructing additional ships. With these new additions, his fleet now numbered 56, and most importantly, with 2 new turtle ships he could bring to bear. On July 7th, 1592, a local farmer came to tell Yi that he had seen a huge Japanese armada, at least 70 ships strong, in the Kyonerang Strait.
They're outnumbered.
Yi had his fleet there by the next day. Knowing that he couldn't maneuver in the strait, Yi sent out 6 of his ships to lure the Japanese.
Hey, it sounds like Salamis in the Persian Wars in Greece.
And sure enough, the entire Japanese force followed at all haste. But this time, the Japanese faced yet another surprise. This technique of luring out the Japanese had been working so well that Yi had trained his men in a special formation called the Crane's Wing, where they would form a U around the enemy vessels that chased his ships, compressing them from all sides, making them easy targets, and leaving them no room to maneuver. The Crane's Wing descended.
Smart.
The sound of cannon fire ripped the air. One of the largest naval battles in world history raged for hours. But when the smoke cleared, 47 of the Japanese ships were sunk and 12 were captured. Only 14 of them escaped to the harbor at Busan, and still, not a single Korean ship was lost.
Still? The greatest or biggest naval battles in history, and the Koreans are still not losing? That's incredible. Because they were outnumbered in that. Because didn't they say the Japanese fleet was like 70-something, and the Koreans were 50-something? That's nuts.
The next day, Yi was informed of the location of the other 2 admirals' fleets. They were anchored together at Angulpo. Yi saw the opportunity for a decisive blow, and so he set his vessels fresh off the last battle towards another attack. This time, though, no matter what he tried, the Japanese refused to be lured out of their position. So Yi sent his ships in small assault squads, using their superior range to hammer the largest of the Japanese ships, then moving clear so another squad could circle in and fire. The battle was long and bloody. Though still none of Yi's ships were sunk, between the action outside of Kyonerang and the Battle of Angolpo, hundreds of his sailors were wounded. It was the most damage the Japanese had done to Yi's fleet to date. But the majority of the Japanese fleet in the harbor was destroyed. Only a few ships remained, and these Yi ordered not to be touched, because many of the Japanese soldiers had fled to the nearby shore, and, as he said, many brigands escaped into the mountains where local inhabitants have taken refuge. If all the Japanese ships were to be burned, the brigands would massacre Korean citizens in revenge. As he expected, instead of slaughtering the peasants in the hills, the Japanese boarded their remaining boats and slipped away in the night. 6 days later, upon hearing the news of these calamitous defeats, Hideyoshi ordered all offensive naval operations to cease. From now on, the Japanese Navy would only guard the passage to Busan. And so, with one stroke, Yi destroyed all of Hideyoshi's hopes for invading China. And without being able to resupply...
So that was the goal, right? They talked about the Korea was just a way to pass through to China. And that was the bigger goal. The bigger prize, sort of, for the Japanese was actually taking over China. So yeah, you got to think the Chinese are very, very thankful for Admiral Yi and the Koreans for doing this.
Even the Japanese efforts on the Korean peninsula were in jeopardy. The supply lines to the forces occupying Pyongyang were sorely stretched, and pursuing the Korean court any further became effectively impossible. Though the Korean army had been beaten on land time and time again, Yi had saved Korea. But the war wasn't over. Join us next time for Yi's attempt to land a finishing blow, treachery, and perhaps the greatest last stand in naval history.
Interesting. Okay. All right, great episode. Focused mostly on that naval battle. A couple things, again, that stood out was the fact that the Koreans did not lose really anything, and the Armada is unbelievable. Unbelievably successful at this type of warfare. I mean, because if not for the Admiral Yi stuff, right, they would have continued on land and taken over Korea, and then got into China, and then who knows what happens there in China, whether they're successful or not, whatever. But big kind of alternate history reality there. If Admiral Yi hadn't done what he did with the Navy, what would the domino effect have been of potential Japanese imperialism in mainland Asia clear back in the 1500s, which again we're not going to see till centuries later. Interesting story. Again, a lot of this is new. I do not know much about this little part of the Japanese and Korean conflict. I know about them like individually, but not as much the fighting there with Admiral Yi. So this has been awesome. So I haven't been able to add a ton like of extra things, but I'm learning a ton there, and I am enjoying that as well. So awesome. Okay, well, look out for part 4. I believe this is a 6-part series, so we're just passing halfway there. Definitely want to finish it up. I'm really enjoying this, and hopefully you are too. Anything you have to add it down in the comments. If you have anything to add to this, other things, that's awesome. Let's make it an active history community. Another thing you do to get more active is join our Discord server. There'll be a link down below, as well as to the original video, and also to Patreon, where this video series was selected, and other ways that you can support the channel. So thanks again for being here. If you haven't subbed, love to have you around. Hope to see you around more and be a familiar face, and we'll see you next time. Bye.